Number 5. The Lexington. If you're a Texas native, then you probably don't need much introduction to the USS Lexington. Formerly known as the Blue Ghost, the decommissioned aircraft carrier now stands as a museum, and it's thought by some to hold a lot more than some old war relics and stories. Might just contain some old souls who've never quite left its service. The museum's director of operations, Charles Russell, claims that the museum receives hundreds upon hundreds of reports of supernatural and inexplicable activity and sightings every single year. Most famous among them is a benevolent ghost dressed in a sailor's uniform who aids guests in finding their way around the ship before vanishing back into the air. He describes one particularly vivid encounter with a spirit inhabiting his office where, after losing 6 pens over the course of a week, he found all of them arranged perfectly, laying side by side in front of his keyboard. He reassures visitors that the spirits who live aboard the Lexington are playful, not frightful. They're more like Casper in that regard, I guess. Other stories tell sightings and reports of hearing lost souls running for cover after a torpedo attack, describing running sounds and other strange noises in the hangar bay. The paranormal tour guide aboard the Lexington describes it as, this was their home and they don't want to go anywhere else. I kind of get it, you know? I'd want to live on an aircraft carrier, that seems pretty cool. I'd try to swing that as long as I could. Like most purportedly haunted locations, if finding something spooky in the cold steel of the Lexington truly interests you, the museum offers a paranormal investigation tour where guests can spend the night with their own equipment in the hopes of finding someone to trip up your EVP meter. And if that ain't enough for you and you're looking for something spooky from the confines of your own home, well, we can hook you up with that real easy. Click through on Top 5 Scary because we've got loads of videos about haunted spots, ghosts, ghouls, goblins, aliens, cryptids, conspiracies, and just about anything freaky you can think up. Stay subscribed, stay scared, but, you know, stay watching this video as well, okay? We worked hard. Number 4. Le Carafe. Le Carafe up in Houston looks unassuming at first. Looks like a pretty typical dive bar experience. Looks nice though, I definitely would like to go. But if you believe the rumors, allegedly this is one of the most haunted buildings in the entire state. The bar also is one of the oldest buildings in Texas as well, having been initially built sometime in the early 1800s. It's seen life as quite a few things: a pharmacy, an apothecary, a bakery, and eventually Le Carafe. So it's not too surprising that in all of its years of service, picked up a few guests who aren't ready to pay the bill and leave just yet. Many regular customers have a ghost story to tell you, as well as the bartenders. Many report strange noises, a glass breaking mysteriously, some even seeing lipstick stains in a glass they're drinking from appear out of nowhere. Do ghosts have germs? Is it safe to share a drink with a ghost? I don't know if I would do that unless we got to know each other a bit first, and then hey, anything can happen. I'm open. The bar is said to be haunted by a former tender named Carl, who frequent guests claim they can hear shouting out for last call still years after passing the bar. Some claim they can see Carl's silhouette through a second-floor window. Another ghost said to haunt the premises is the Lady in White, who supposedly pushed attractive women down the stairs. Hardly a way to get them to like you, let me tell you from experience. She's thought to be the ghost of a woman who ran a cat house near the Carafe. Believers say that they see orbs and mist in photos and feel cold spots all over. I guess you could say they serve up more than one kind of spirits. I'll see myself out. I'm sorry, that's not my best work. If you're ever in Houston and looking for a bit of spooky ambiance, definitely check out the Carafe and all of its otherworldly guests. Just make sure to tip your ghost about 15%. Number 3. Monaster Nagayal the Duff, or Abbey of the Black Hag if you don't got all that time. Wow, you see that? You see what that church is called in that little chyron below me right now? I'm just supposed to pronounce that with like my lips? Okay, it's also called the Abbey of the Black Hag, and that's what we're going with. We're not calling it that other thing. I'm not doing that. Black Abbey of the Hag, only name this church has ever gone by, and it was built in 1298. And it was one of the well-known medieval convents in Old Ireland. The remains of the abbey still stand today in a secluded valley, making it already mysterious and supernatural place just that much more supernatural and overgrown and spooky. I mean, the place is called the Abbey of the Black Hag. You don't name a place that unless it's extremely haunted or if there's like a cool boss fight or something there. Sounds like it's straight out of Dishonored. It's believed that the last abbess, horrible word by the way, in charge of the abbey practiced witchcraft, and in the scary way, okay? She brought death, misfortune to the surrounding areas. Pope Martin V condemned the abbey, not being down for witches at all. The accused witch left to live out in the damp, deserted abbey by herself, which she probably loved because it sounds scary. Over time, her skin blackened, her hair furled, and her soul twisted, leading to the place being renamed the Abbey of the Black Hag. And if you can believe it, there's actually more to this one. The Count and Countess of Desmond once called the abbey home when attempting to flee their attackers, where the Countess was fatally struck by an arrow and buried by her husband. But it wouldn't be the end of the Countess, because sightings of a ghostly figure around the ruins of the abbey were common, meaning someone eventually went to dig up that grave, finding worn out finger bones, meaning she was still alive when she was buried. It's said now that a woman's panicked shrieking can be heard in the early hours around the abbey. Number 2. The Borley Rectory. The Borley Rectory is an old London estate that has the unique distinction of being considered the most haunted building in the United Kingdom. No big deal or anything. Almost immediately after its construction, stories of hauntings started to creep out. One of the first local legends says that in the 12th century, a priest and a nun had a naughty little affair, and when they were discovered, the nun was bricked up and left to rot in the nearby church. Since then, they say that her spirit roams the rectory. In 1900, 4 daughters of the then estate owner all said that they saw a nun wandering around the estate late at night. They tried to talk to her but got no response back, just a scary ghost stare. The family claimed they'd see this nun around the property, and on one occasion they thought they saw the spectral apparition of a horse-drawn carriage with a headless rider, some real Sleepy Hollow stuff. From there on, there was all these reports of bizarre sounds or strange shadows creeping out the corner of your eye. In 1927, the estate changed hands as the original family owning the estate had all passed on, and a new family, the Smiths, had moved in. Shortly after, they discovered a human skull in the cupboard in a brown bag. Which is not a great housewarming gift, to be honest. They reported poltergeist behavior, unexplained footsteps, lights flicking around them, and the same sightings of headless specters. Now, they only lasted 2 years, not being down for any of the hauntings or skulls in cupboards, any of that business. And the next family, the Foysters, didn't have much better luck. They had objects flying around their home, and on one occasion claimed their daughter was attacked by something truly horrible. They moved out as well. And the last owner of the rectory would be Captain Gregson, who accidentally lit the estate ablaze while unpacking, although insurance claims they think the fire was started intentionally, perhaps in a desperate attempt to cast away whatever evil has been trapped in the Borley Rectory for so long, or perhaps he unintentionally unleashed it out into the world. Time will tell. At number 1, Mortimer Abbey. Mortimer Abbey is a monastery in the forest of Lyons, France. A real old church built in 1134 on marshland, near the stagnant water of the drainage lake. The monks dug it out to try and dry the marshy land around the Fulbrock stream, which was called the Dead Pond. In French, Mortemont, which is where the name comes from. You can kind of hear it there. Mortimer, you know. Perhaps it's this history of being built on a dead pond is why Mortimer Abbey was doomed to be haunted. Now, the abbey flourished for centuries, but over time started to become claimed by the passage of time, and it fell into decline and disrepair. In the 17th century, there was an attempt to try and rebuild the abbey and recapture its former old glory, but the decline was already pretty present and had set in by that point, and by the time of the French Revolution, only 5 monks still remained in the abbey. Eventually, the abbey would collapse entirely and go private, and in 1863, the abbey would find itself in the hands of a rich Parisian family, the Delarues. Mr. Delarue moved his wife and his sons into the abbey, but soon discovered they weren't the only tenants. While walking the lawns, the young people of the house saw a light from the library. As if by an invisible hand, these hatches unfastened, their handles turned, and the windows and doors all opened. The paintings on the inside of the abbey turned themselves around and steps thundered out into the halls, and nobody moved out immediately after. I would have started looking for new real estate right then and there. But one night, the young Delarue, Charles, had his fiancée over to come see the estate that would become her new home in marriage. She was offered the guest room, but found herself terrified during the night when she couldn't sleep because she was too busy being tormented by mysterious sounds and objects around the room that were hurling themselves around, being possessed by something. Having had, quite frankly, enough, like I think any of us might have, the young suitor announced she would never live in this house, called off the entire marriage, and hurried back to Paris tout de suite, where there were plenty of handsome young men asking her hand in marriage who didn't live in old haunted estates, okay? That's the message to take away from this. get the love you deserve, and the love you deserve is not in a haunted house. Number 5. Island of the Dolls. The Island of the Dolls is a peculiar small island just off the coast south of Mexico City. The island is covered, well, absolutely blanketed in hanging dolls, just about everywhere on the small landmass. I probably don't even need to really delve into any of the lore behind this island for you to believe that it's cursed. You can just take a look at it and understand. I mean, it's a secluded, abandoned island inhabited exclusively by dilapidated dolls. What do you need? Don Julian Santana Barrera was a man who had isolated himself from the rest of Mexico City, choosing instead to live alone on this small, meager island. His world would be thrown upside down when he discovered a body laying on the shore one day. Shortly following the discovery, a doll washed up on shore as well, having come in from the channel. This event would change Barrera's life forever. Barrera hung the doll up on the island, believing that this would appease the spirit of the girl and set her free. Well, either it didn't work, or he believed he needed a bit of extra protection, because for the rest of his life, Barrera made it his mission to hang as many dolls as he could across the island, scavenging them from the channel, some from the trash, wherever he could find them, until the island's reputation preceded it. And what was once a small, private residence became the infamous Island of the Dolls. Barrera's story would be cut short in 2001, when his body was discovered in the channel floating, just like the doll all those years ago. But his legacy far from ended there. The island has become a notorious tourist destination, only attainable by a boat out of Mexico City. While most guides are happy to take you, there are some who outright refuse the journey for fear of spirits. It's said that if you are to visit, it's best to bring a doll, to appease whoever could still be living there. Ugh. I kinda ran a tingle down my spine, and that's just number 5. Now if you want more stories like that, we have them coming every single day, hot and fresh. All you've got to do is subscribe and creep on creeping on. Let's keep going. Number 4. The Stanley Hotel. Who doesn't love a nice stay at a good hotel, you know? Someone to tend to your needs, breakfast ready for you wake up, and a TV where you'll flick through the channels for half an hour before settling on Ghostbusters 2, because that's the only thing that's on. Let me introduce you to the Stanley Hotel, one of America's most beautiful resorts. Built in 1909 next to the picturesque Rocky Mountains in Colorado, the Stanley Hotel is a great place to get away from it all. It's isolated away from the rest of the world, and if you're starting to wonder why this hotel seems a bit familiar to you, maybe if I called it the Overlook Hotel, it might come together? Yeah, the Stanley Hotel is the original inspiration for the Overlook Hotel from The Shining. Stephen King found the inspiration for his famous haunted hotel after spending a cursed night in room 217, the haunted room from the novel. Amusingly, while the Stanley Hotel served as the actor of sorts for the Overlook in the TV series, it didn't for Stanley Kubrick's legendary adaptation. In that, the hotel standing in for the Overlook asked that room 217 not be used in the film, as it was a real operating room and the hotel was afraid it would lose business, so they changed it to the non-existent room 237 for the legendary Kubrick picture. Now, I could do IMDb trivia about Stanley Kubrick movies all day. What makes the Stanley Hotel so scary? Well, it goes without saying that it's said to be a haunted hotel. All manners of hauntings have been reported. Eerie laughter, unexplained noises, ghostly apparition, things moving on their own, and so forth. Now, the Stanley Hotel embraces its status as a haunted hotel with gleeful open arms. Ghost hunters are invited to stay in their spirited rooms that are purported to have higher levels of supernatural activity. Unsurprisingly, these are the most booked rooms in the entire hotel. Stephen King recounts that the direct events that inspired The Shining was that while he was visiting the hotel, he was terribly afraid of its isolation and its eeriness, describing eating alone in its giant dining hall, hearing quiet orchestral music played over the speakers in a room distant. Apparently, staying there gave him terrible nightmares of his son being chased by some invisible presence. He says as soon as he woke up from the first one, he lit a cigarette and began to write The Shining then and there. Now my advice for you if you ever take a trip to the Stanley Hotel, make sure you got lots and lots to keep yourself busy with, but make sure you get some time to play. You know what they say about all work and no play, right? Number 3. The Crescent Hotel. If you're ever making your way through Arkansas, you simply have to stop off at the Crescent Hotel. It's been called the Grand Old Lady of the Ozarks due to its gorgeous old Gothic design and wonderful mountaintop view. It's kind of a shame almost that such a pretty place has such a morbid, haunted history, but that seems to be a running theme with all these delightful old hotels. The more beautiful they are, the more haunted you are. Its problems began during its construction. A construction worker named Michael plunged to his death from the roof, fatally landing in room 218. Unsurprisingly, since then, that room room is said to be haunted, with guests reporting bizarre noises being heard from inside. And this is far from the only cursed tale of this hotel though. Before it found a new life as a hotel, the Crescent was a alternative clinic of sorts, run by a charismatic charlatan by the name of Norman Baker, who claimed that the waters of the nearby springs were so refreshing and so restorative that they could cure any ailment you might have. This might surprise you, but this was not true, as Baker did not have even the most minute amount of medical training. He was just a con man with a winning smile and a bunch of $5 words. Patients would check in expecting to be cured for cancer. That was his main operation. He said he could cure cancer. And his cancer cure was just an injection of corn silk and water, which doesn't do anything. Baker would find himself arrested in 1949, but unfortunately for the victims of his scams, their souls wouldn't find peace just yet. All throughout the hotel, guests report ghostly figures seeing floating orbs passing through the halls, hearing screams, laughters, and strange bumps in the night. One particularly notable ghost around the Crescent is named Theodora, who was once one of the nurses employed there. Well, nurses. They say she hates mess, and many guests report that they'll discover their belongings have been reorganized for them. I love hearing stories about these helpful ghosts that don't haunt you, they just pack up your stuff for you. Among the cutest stories of spirits, however, is reports of a ghost cat named Morris, who guests claim they can hear purring or feeling a warm sensation on their lap or leg. Oh, the little ghost kitty wants some scritches? I guess he ran out of 9 lives. Guess they're not quite enough. I hope there's some meow mix up in the afterlife. Number 2, the Langham. The Langham Hotel is one of the most famous hotels in England. It's gorgeous and renowned, and it's entertained all manner of famous guests over the many years of its service, and if you believe the rumors, might be entertaining them still if their spirits are still lingering onwards. Built in 1865, is it any wonder now that this hotel is a haunting ground for restless spirits? One of the more reported ghosts to come out of the Langham Hotel is that of a man decked out in Victorian evening wear, seemingly trapped inside room 333. He appears during October, unable to move on from his final resting spot. If you ask the locals, they'll tell you a story of how years and years past, a doctor and his new wife checked into the Langham for their honeymoon. No one seems to agree on what transpired or why this happened, but what's known is that something inside the doctor snapped, and he claimed the life of his new bride, and overcome with grief, took his own life as well, and since then has been unwilling or unable to leave. In 1973, a BBC journalist staying in the room woke up one night in October and claims he saw a fluorescent hovering ball of pure light above him in the room, which then materialized as this man in front of him. The man appeared in Victorian era attire, then pointed ominously at the reporter, who fled the room. Yeah, I would probably do the exact same thing, to be completely frank. It's very refreshing to hear someone act so rationally towards a ghost. Guests sometimes complain of this room feeling overwhelmingly hot or lights flickering on and off during the middle of the night. You know, classic poltergeist behavior. The Victorian doctor is far from the only ghost said to reside in the hotel. Alongside Napoleon III, a butler, and a man in a powdered wig are all repeat offenders. So if you head on up to the Langham, keep an eye out for those beloved guests. And number 1, Myrtle's Plantation. Our final entry is Myrtle's Plantation, said to be one of the most haunted buildings in the entire United States. It's home to many ghost stories and legends stemming from a violent, sordid, unpleasant past. The plantation was first built in 1796, where it traded hands several times between a number of wealthy families. Our first story of haunting comes from 1834, when it was owned by Clark Woodruff, a prestigious judge and, well, also a slave owner. Of his slaves, one was named Chloe, who was a particular target of Woodruff's unimaginable cruelty. She tried to protect herself by eavesdropping and learning what she could do to alter her behavior, but unfortunately, this would just serve as a punishment, as when Woodruff learned she was eavesdropping on him, he had her ears cut off, and then made her wear a green head wrap to not have to look at what he had done. He sounds like a really lovely, lovely guy. Legend states that to strike back, Chloe poisoned a cake the Woodruffs were going to eat at a party. And weirdly, there's some differing reports and versions of this story change the intent. Sometimes Chloe was looking to get rid of them. Sometimes she just wanted to make them sick to teach them a lesson. Well, the dosage was lethal, and Mrs. Woodruff and the rest of the family, save for Mr. Woodruff, were all lethally poisoned. As a retaliation, Chloe was hanged on the property. Some believe that she still haunts the ground and that her ghost can be seen, still sporting that green head wrap. The next owners would not fare much better. The next owner was a wealthy family, the Winters. Mr. Winter was a teacher, and one day a stranger riding by came out and fired at Mr. Winter fatally, where he staggered up the stairs to breathe his last. Visitors say that you can still hear his forceful stomps up the stairs as he attempted to get help. The plantation harbors a dark history, but has remained a popular spot for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts to go and stay the night to see what they can find.
Number 5. Leap Castle. There are a ton of old haunted castles in Europe, isn't there? Like, that was someone's house at some point. You gotta think, those chamber pots have been used for like 1,000 years. Ugh, yuck. And of course, some dark and nasty history has gone down there at these places as well. You can feel it almost most of the time. Leap Castle, Ireland. Built around 1250. Our first stone cold stop. This place has seen its fair share of bloodshed. Not just one ghost story, and not just a foe, but a friend. Well, family, actually. One of the most lived in castles in Ireland. It's seen some It's housed many a family, generation after generation. Apparently built by the O'Bannon family, way back. Legend has it, 2 brothers dared each other to jump off a cliff for house rights. Yeah, more of a myth, I think. Then comes the O'Carroll family. Now we get into some actual literature. Father dies, powerful family, no successor to take the castle. However, this turned into yet another brother versus brother kinda duel. Couple stabbings around the castle's chapel, and enter stage left, lots of ghosts. Ruthless, right? The smell of burning and decay now apparently. The spirit of the murdered priest now lurks the stairwell, and often reported by staff as a slain brother. What's with the brothers thing? Among the ghostly figures is also Emily and Charlotte, the ghosts of 2 girls playing in the main hall circa 1600s era. The most famous afterlife resident, the Red Lady. There have been sightings of this creature for centuries. She roams in a long red dress, tall and lean. The Red Lady carries a huge dagger as well, with her hand raised. Can you imagine? Stone cold castle, middle of the night. Just scrolling through Instagram after a nice Airbnb night, and you look up to a red ghost lady holding a knife at you. Yeah, I would just like cartoon run on air, you know? Number 4, Kerameikos. As always, if you like what we do here on Top 5 Scary, throw us the thumbs up down below, or leave us a comment to ponder over. Halloween's just next week. Which haunted house does it for you? Churches do it for me, you know? Churches. I don't do creepy, creaky churches, you know? So many floorboards. Okay, so this planet is like old. We're finding things and sites that are literally changing history textbooks as we speak. Göbekli Tepe, Petra, like Syria and Turkey, these places are old, but Greece is like ancient old. Newsweek reported that in 2020, a collection of more than 30 inscribed tablets were found at the bottom of a 3,000-year-old Athenian well in the ancient cemetery of Kerameikos. Yeah, scary enough, right? You see these tablets bear individual curses and prayers to the Greek gods of the underworld. So all sorts of nasty energy just floating atop there. Juta Strazek, who led the excavation, said that whoever ordered the curses inscribed on the tablets was unnamed, but the black magic seen, heard, and felt at the site is present there for all to research. Even though back then black magic and the use of curses was forbidden in Greece during that time, which makes this even more horrifying. Just refound in 2016, the cemetery itself was first excavated in 1870 from the Greek ministry. Progress halted during World War II, and the excavation then lost momentum. The excavation site consists of a massive sanctuary holding thousands of precious artifacts. Kerameikos comes from the Greek word for pottery or ceramics, arguably the most important cemetery of ancient Athens, riddled with the oldest tombs and curses that went along with them. There's always like adultery feuds too, isn't there? I curse thee, Demetria, for looking at my Adonis. Like lots of jealousy and lying back then, it seems.
Number 3, the Stanley Hotel. The Stanley Hotel was opened in 1909 by the American inventor and entrepreneur Freeland Oscar Stanley. In the years since its opening, it has developed the reputation as being one of the world's most famous and influential haunted hotels, having been described as the Disneyland for ghosts. All throughout the hotel, paranormal activity is reported, with vacuums being turned off or having their plugs torn out of the walls at any given moment. But there are 3 consistent sites sites of ghost activity on the premises that we will explore. The 4th floor of the hotel was originally a cavernous attic, before eventually being converted into the living quarters for the female employees, their children, and nannies. In the years since, it has been converted into guest rooms, but the spirits of the past are still known to stick around. Guests have reported seeing their closet doors opening and closing on their own, and hearing the sounds of children running around and giggling while they play. In room 428, guests have reported seeing the ghost of a friendly cowboy appearing at the corner of the bed, who is believed to be the spirit of Rocky Mountain Jim Nugent, a guide from the late 1800s who was known for only having one eye after being attacked by a bear. Another haunted location is the concert hall, which was built by Stanley as a gift for his wife Flora, who can often be heard playing her piano late into the night. Another spirit who can be found in the hall is a former employee named Paul, who used to enforce the 11 p.m. curfew, and who now nudges guests and workers who are in the hall late at night, and will sometimes flicker the lights and tell them to get out. Most infamous is room 217, which is apparently haunted by the ghost of a housekeeper named Elizabeth Wilson. She apparently flickers the lights, moves objects, and will even unpack the guest's luggage. She is, however, somewhat old-fashioned, and will literally try and drive a wedge between unwed couples who share the bed, with several couples describing a cold force coming between them in the night, and the man's bags being packed and left by the door in the morning. Although this has never been confirmed, when the movie Dumb and Dumber was filmed in the area, Jim Carrey stayed in room 217 and was so scared by something in the room that he ran out of the room half naked and screaming in the middle of the night. The hotel was on the verge of being closed down until an author and his family stayed at the Stanley in 1974, the day before it closed for the season. They were the only guests, and the large, empty, ornate hotel left them feeling extremely uneasy. When the author and his wife stayed in room 217 that night, he had a vivid nightmare about his son being attacked in the hallways, and when Stephen King awoke, he had the idea for his best-selling novel, The Shining. In the years since the novel's publication and the release of the film adaptation by Stanley Kubrick, the Stanley Hotel has embraced its spooky reputation, offering ghost tours, having a television channel that plays the film on a loop, available for guests, and even constructing an elaborate hedge maze in order to make the hotel more like the fictional Overlook Hotel it inspired. The Stanley Hotel is a must-visit site for paranormal and horror fans that they'll never want to leave. And if they get lost in the hedge maze, they never will. Number 2. Ruthin Castle. The Ruthin Castle in North Wales was built in the early 1200s by Edward I to replace the wooden fortress that stood in its place before, as a gift to the king's loyal allies, eventually ending up in the hands of Reginald de Grey as a reward for helping Edward assemble the finest army in the world. The modern castle was built within the original castle's ruins in 1826, before being sold to be used as a hospital in 1923 and eventually being converted into a hotel in the 1960s. Some of the most famous figures that have stayed in the castle over the course of its long and storied history include King Henry VII and his daughter Mary, making this a location that you can stay in that once housed the original and authentic Bloody Mary. Although, as always, summoning her in a darkened room is not recommended. One of the most haunted rooms in the hotel is room 222, where several guests have reported sudden and extreme drops in temperature, as well as hearing slamming doors and tapping sounds all around the room. Another consistent tale is the little girl who is often seen at night knocking on guests' doors and running through the halls and on the roof while giggling. Also commonly cited is a soldier, supposedly one who died defending the castle while serving in King Edward's army, who can be seen wandering the castle grounds dressed in full medieval armor. However, the most infamous apparition is the ghost of Reginald de Grey's wife, Lady Grey. She apparently caught her husband having an affair and in a jealous rage dispatched the mistress with an axe. She was sentenced to death, and her body was not allowed to be buried on consecrated grounds and was instead buried outside the castle walls. Perhaps due to not being able to receive a proper burial, many guests and employees have reported seeing Lady Grey wandering the castle grounds, as well as the rooms on the upper floor and in the banquet hall, still carrying her axe. Despite its creepy history, this hotel is known for treating its guests like royalty, providing them with a variety of different rooms at different price points and having a world-class spa, as well as the ability to participate in a medieval banquet and tours of the grounds, the dungeons, the drowning pool, and the whipping pit, making this one castle you won't mind being laid siege in. Number 1. The Emily Morgan Hotel. Located in the American city of San Antonio, Texas, this Gothic-style building, built in 1920 1924, was originally a medical center with its own hospital, morgue, crematorium, and psych ward. It operated in this capacity until it closed in 1976 and was eventually converted and reopened as a hotel in 1984. Although no longer a hospital, some guests have reported hearing hospital carts being wheeled up and down the halls and smelling the distinct smell of antiseptic on the 14th floor. On the 7th floor, where the psych ward operated, there are reports of a ghost bride who is known to wander the halls and wake guests with terrifying screams. In the basement, which used to house the crematorium, employees report the smell of burning flesh and the apparition of glowing floating orbs, as well as disembodied voices crying out in pain. If this isn't ghostly enough, you can look out the window and see another notoriously haunted building, as the Alamo is located directly across the street. With all the local history, you will never want to leave once you receive some of that Texas hospitality. Staying the night in a haunted hotel sounds like a stressful experience, but it still sounds preferable to staying at the Econo Lodge Motel.
Number 5. St. Mary the Virgin Church. Clop Hill, England. I gotta say, that sounds like it's a fake place, like where Sir Topham Hatt lives. Well, not only is it real, but it's home to a bone-chilling haunted church, St. Mary the Virgin Church. Now, St. Mary was built in 1350 outside the main settlement of totally real place Clop Hill. Traditionally, churches are built facing the east. I didn't know that. It's so it can align with the sun rising, which in Christianity is associated with heaven and the Messiah. Churches have their altars facing east, so you pray in that holy direction. Well, St. Mary's just had to be a little different, and this church is facing the west, facing away from God. And it's why some people believe the church is hosted to evil spirits, as facing west means they've shunned God and opened their doors to the devil. Paranormal investigators have strongly suspected the church as being host to satanic rituals. As the church fell into disuse, it became a popular spot for vandals, and if you believe the legends, black magic. In 1963, a local couple saw two people wandering around holding a human skull, which definitely I think would cause you to look twice. The people told the couple that they had found the skull in St. Mary's, where it had been jammed into a wall. When the couple went to investigate, they found on the floor a breastbone, pelvis, and leg bones, all laid out in a pattern used for black mass. Pretty spooky. Scattered cockerel feathers and tracings of two crosses filled in red were found inside the church as well. And as if that wasn't slightly unnerving enough, they also found that 6 graves of women in particular had been tampered with as well. All signs seem to be pointing towards some dark rituals happening at St. Mary's Church. Common sightings at the St. Mary's Church range from smaller scale things like strange screeching during the night or hearing the bell going off despite being long abandoned, and the more threatening reports seeing tall, dark figures wandering the ruins of the church, perhaps getting themselves ready for another ritual, or perhaps they've been contacted by a ritual and are arriving. Only thing I know is I won't be checking out the midnight mass there anytime soon. And if you're interested in way more scary stories of all manners, cryptids, conspiracies, churches, hauntings, aliens, we've got a little bit of everything at Top 5 Scary. So click on through, find something to get cozy with, and subscribe, and make sure you hit that bell so you catch all of our videos as they drop. But do all that stuff at the end of this one, okay? Because we got way more haunted churches for you coming right up. Number 4. Our next entry on the list today is going to be the Aquia Episcopal Church. And if you haven't said that, try saying that 10 times fast. I dare you. Located in picturesque Stafford, Virginia. The church has 200 years of history to it, which means it's also got approximately 200 years worth of ghost stories to study. When the church was first built way back when in the 18th century, it was stained by an unfortunate tragedy. You see, the surrounding areas were exhausted by war and the lack of resources, food, and money, and as such, brigands would take to the dark country roads to attack innocents during the night for whatever they had on them. Well, one young woman was hiding from a gang of highwaymen and marauders and sought out the church as a safe haven. Unfortunately, the bandits eventually caught up with her and she met an untimely end. Now, these men were never caught for their crime, and her body was not found for hundreds of years, left there to rot and decompose. And many believe that because of this, her spirit is tied to the church. And there have been several reports of hauntings ever since the discovery of those accursed bones. Visitors mention hearing footsteps frantically scattered around at night. These footsteps break into a run, but if you go searching, you'll never be able to find anyone attached to them. Voices can be heard in the room where she was attacked, some saying it sounds like a call for help or a painful scream of a struggle. Some go so far as to say they saw a transparent apparition of the woman in the church's windows or on the balcony. One story comes to us from a custodian who worked the graveyard graveyard shift there in the 1990s, claiming that he saw a ghostly woman's face floating above the Graces, and says that he saw her smiling at him through the balcony windows before she vanished. One last one on this church. In the 1990s, to celebrate the bicentennial anniversary, the church sent out an invitation to a group of Civil War reenactors to fight a mock battle on its ground. During the night, one of the reenactors was complaining that there was a red and orange light that was flickering the entire night during the church that prevented him from sleeping. The man explained this to the father of the church, and the father explained back that there was no electricity in the vestry, and that the light must have been the spirit confused by why the Civil War had started up again. Imagine, you're a ghost, you're already out of time, and then you look outside and you see guys from your time? My little ghostly sense of the world would be so thrown off. I would have to buy a new ghost calendar.
Number 3. The Vanishing Village. Way up north, a village named after a bountiful, massive freshwater lake in Canada's Nunavut. 1932. A Canadian fur trapper and explorer went to the village of Anjakuni Lake. The people's known there for their markets of elaborate fish and extensive wine. This village was a staple for most on the map. Joe LaBelle, a well-known fur trapper and well-known in the village, had an otherworldly sight when he arrived. He arrived and sensed something was a little wrong, a little too quiet, too foggy. He found that the village was completely emptied and deserted, even though there were lots of signs of life still present. Campfires blazing, pots still boiling, doors were even open, and food out waiting to be served. Thousands of Anjakuni villagers had simply vanished. He sent a telegraph to the closest RCMP office and told them about his account. And here's the scary part. They launched an official investigation which was never solved. They took a testimony from another trapper and his 2 sons who said they saw a large cylindrical object transform into a bullet shape before flying directly over Anjakuni Lake. At the village, the police found the kayaks were still on the beach, meals still in the early stages of rot, and apparently the headstones were even stacked neatly in piles on either side of the graves. Okay? To this day, there's no proper explanation for this mass disappearance of people and the hundreds of empty graves. Number 2. Skeleton Lake. Deep within the Himalayas of India lays the bay of an ancient lake, shrouded by an ancient mystery, Rupkund Lake, famously known as Skeleton Lake. It was rediscovered by the British Forest Rangers in 1942, and what they found was pretty jarring. Hundreds of ancient human skeletons found at the edge of the lake. Investigations led some to think that this was a catastrophe of some sort, or the remains of a legendary event where a group was suddenly killed in a violent storm around the 9th century. Nope! 3 different groups of people died here all at different times. It's not located on or near a trade route. No evidence of any ancient bacteria pathogen, ruling out diseases. Yeah, this one's really weird. One group of people had genetics to present-day South Asia, while the other group related to the people of Central Europe. And finally, a group particularly from the Greek island of Crete. But how? All here? They found the bones and deaths were genetically separated in time by as much as 1,000 years difference. Wooden artifacts, iron spearheads, even slippers and jewelry were found by the National Geographic team who studied 30 skeletons in 2003. Skin still on some of them. Ugh. 300 people have been found so far. Legend goes, Parvati, a supreme goddess, cursed the kingdom, unleashing drought and disaster upon them. She sent down a blizzard of hail and whirlwind which swept the people into the lake. Their skeletons are a warning to those who disrespect the goddess. I mean, maybe. The skeletons are visible in the clear water of the shallow lake during 1 month when the ice melts. That's terrifying. I'm gonna chicken out right now and just never visit this place. Just show up and get Jack Skellingtoned? Are you kidding me? No way, dude. And number 1, the City of Screams. Top of my relaxing trip list, Golgotha City, Afghanistan. Peaceful once as it was the capital of the Ghorid people, until Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire seized it in about the 12th century. Apparently legend goes its ruler, Jalaluddin Mangburnu, fought back and apparently killed Khan's grandson in battle. Yeah, probably not a good idea. In 1221, Khan sent his 15-year-old Mudu Khan here to claim and siege, who in turn was shot and killed with an arrow, precipitating the siege of Bamyan. At first, the city held strong, but was apparently sold out by the ruler's daughter, who, according to legend, betrayed the castle's secret entrance, sharing and consorting with the enemy. Expecting to be rewarded, her and her people were unfortunately slaughtered, and the ruins cursed, of course. And the ruins Cursed, of course. The Russians, the Taliban, and the Americans have all used these ruins as fighting posts over the years, as this place hasn't been lived in since. But through them is apparently very haunted the ruins subject to those who still hear the screams of the fallen. Yeah. Terrifying. Haunting sounds of screaming and warfare are echoed here, thus giving it its famous name of the City of Screams. Dark horseback figures to even full-on uniformed specters are seen atop the rubble. Yeah, I just say we just avoid this place completely and just kind of back away slowly out of respect, you know?
Number 5, the Stanley Hotel. The Stanley Hotel is as infamous as it is gorgeous. This scenic Colorado hotel isn't just famous for a picturesque view of the Rockies, it's also got quite a reputation for serving as the inspiration for fiction's most famous haunted hotel, the Overlook. Now, it didn't serve as the film set for the Stanley Kubrick film, but it was used for the limited TV series and of course inspired Stephen King's legendary horror novel. In 1974, King and his wife stayed at the hotel, visiting at a time when the hotel was preparing to close down for the season. King states that spending time in such a grandiose location, isolated from the rest of the world, away from other guests and signs of life, hearing this discordant, sad music playing in a giant empty dance hall ignited his imagination. He said he was fired up returning to his room 217, and upon pulling back the curtain to his clawfoot tub imagined, what if somebody died there? And started writing The Shining that night. Now, since it's become known as the Overlook, the hotel has developed a real reputation for hauntings, even being dubbed the Disneyland for ghost hunters at one point. Paranormal enthusiasts come to check out everything staying at the Stanley, and the hotel itself encourages this behavior, offering guided tours. Some highlights include, obviously, room 217, the cursed room from the novel, and it's the most requested room in the hotel. Stories go that in the early 1900s, the head housekeeper was blasted through a floor after a gas leak caused an explosion, and they say that her spirit inhabits the room today, and guests report finding help from the afterlife. Luggage unpacked, lights being turned off, I gotta say, that is some room service. They say that almost every room and cranny of the Stanley is haunted in some way. Is it all just legend inspired by the novel, or is truth stranger than fiction? You'd have to book a trip up to the Stanley to find out. Take their Ghost Hunters package when you do, and tell them Top 5 Scary sent you. And if you're looking for more horror content and you just can't wait, you don't have to go anywhere off this page. Click through on Top 5 Scary because we have loads and loads of ghost videos for you to enjoy. Cryptids, aliens, scary stories, pretty much anything scary you can shake a stick at, we've got. So stay subscribed, stay scared, but stay watching this video because we got way more story left to go. Number 4, the Fairmont Banff. Our next entry is one of Canada's most famous haunted hotels, and you know me, I love a local haunt. That's a little pun for you. The gorgeous property is well known internationally, and not just for its stunning views, but apparently because the place is just top to bottom ghost central. Let's take a look at some of the more notable ones that are haunting the property. The most famous specter at the Fairmont is that of the Ghost Bride. That was a Tim Burton movie, wasn't it? Her story takes us back to the late 1920s, and allegedly it goes that a beautiful young bride was dressed in her gown, ready for the ceremony, when something caught her heel, causing her to slip and fall down the hotel stairs, careening downwards, tragically cutting her life short. Since then, hotel staff and guests alike have reported numerous sightings of a weird veiled figure moving up and down the stairs in a long ethereal white gown, or seeing her in the ballroom by herself, dancing alone, waiting for that first dance she never got. Aww. I dance with you, Ghost Bride. The bride is only one of many ghosts though. The Banff doesn't want to give out the room numbers to avoid any trouble, but allegedly a great number of the rooms in the hotel are cursed. One in question is allegedly the site of a brutal crime, and the story has been told and retold countless times over with details swapped around to make it scarier, but it says that a family was all found dead, and since then, guests have reported horrifying things like hearing screams in the middle of the night or finding handprints on the mirror. If you visit the floor the room is supposed to be on, this room will be closed down to keep guests out, although they say it's just for renovations. Go there, check it out, and then decide for yourself if that's all just a cover story. Number 3, Missouri State Penitentiary. Once dubbed the bloodiest 47 acres in America, it is no surprise at all that Missouri State Pen is home to all kinds of rumors to be haunted by the souls of its former inmates. inmates. The prison was nicknamed The Walls, and shortly after its construction was already home to 2,000 inmates, doubling that size in the progressing years. The prison was home to several riots and escape attempts, with the most infamous attempt occurring in 1954, when some 2,500 inmates participated in a massive day-long riot. 4 buildings burned and the National Guard was called in. Shockingly, out of this, only 4 inmates were fatally injured during this event, and none managed to escape, lending to the prison's hard reputation. Now, the prison has always been reported to be haunted, even during its operation, with both guards and inmates during its service claiming to see spectral apparitions. Most of the ghost stories come out of the prison's oldest building, the A building, home to some of the crueler punishments, including an underground room called the Dungeon, a dank, hostile basement with a low ceiling forcing prisoners into a subservient position where the only light that could be observed was a slit through the door. Modern visitors to the dungeon complain of the disgusting odor of bodies that's pungent, and they feel like they're being watched. Disembodied voices have even been picked up by EVP monitors while wandering through the dungeon. In the control room, visitors report occasionally seeing a spirit called Fast Jack, a medical practitioner from the prison's operating days, who can be seen appearing as a ghastly figure holding a clipboard and a white lab coat, frantically scurrying around the control room trying to carry out some duty from when he was alive, slamming lockers and opening doors. Several ghost hunting groups over the years have investigated the Missouri State Pen, including legendary ghost hunting hero Zach Baggins and the Ghost Adventures crew, finding mysterious voices and what looked like shadow people wandering the halls. Although the bloodiest 47 acres in America might have dried up and the walls are now open to the public, for the inmates who are still impounded there, it's as terrifying as ever. Number 2. West Virginia Penitentiary. Almost heaven. West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, and haunted prisons. The Appalachians might be home to one of the most beautiful parts of the United States, but West Virginia Penitentiary is anything but. In 1863, after West Virginia seceded from Virginia Classic, the new fledgling state needed its own prison, and Moundsville, West Virginia was chosen as the home for their new state pen. The prison's conditions were unlivable. West Virginia Penn frequently made the Department of Justice's top 10 violent prisons in the country. Idea for a new video. An infamous spot in the prison was known as the Sugar Shack, a small rec room for the inmates that served as a hotbed for all kinds of violent illegal activity. The prison is also home to a famous electric chair that an inmate was forced to build, nicknamed Ol' Sparky. Ol' Sparky is still standing there today. In the 1950s, the prison was so overcrowded that 3 prisoners at a time would be shoved into one cramped 7 by 5 foot cell. The men were kept like animals in cages. Riots and violent outbursts were fairly commonplace. The prison was overcrowded, dilapidated and run down, and staffed by overwhelmed guards. Eventually, the prison would be forced to open its gates, decommissioning as a prison and shipping all of its inmates elsewhere. The building still stands and is used as a training facility for law enforcement officers, but it's been said that the spirits of those whose lives ended here still wander. Hunters report equipment malfunctioning walking by the Sugar Shack or any of the cell blocks where the more violent inmates were housed. Reports of banging on the walls late at night, as well as random screams, are fairly commonplace too. The prison was reportedly haunted while inmates still populated it, with some of the earliest stories of hauntings stemming from the 1930s. It's thought that the prison was built on top of an indigenous gravesite of the Adena people, which has led to some speculation as perhaps an explanation for the hauntings. Like most of the prisons on this list, if you're curious enough yourself, West Virginia Penn is available to visit for tours, and you can even pop by the Sugar Shack and Ol' Sparky. And finally, number 1, Alcatraz. Alcatraz might very well be the United States' most infamous prison. On Alcatraz Island, just outside of San Fran, lies the notorious jail, built to house America's most deadly inmates, like Al Capone, Arthur Barker, or George Kelly. It was home to a legendary breakout that was made into a film, Escape from Alcatraz, and also set the stage for Michael Bay's action classic The Rock, which was about breaking into Alcatraz. The prison was built to drain the hope out of inmates, to break the spirits of the most rebellious inmates, and was legendary for its awful conditions. Tiny cramped cells, indifferent guards, and frequent bouts of violence and riots were all commonplace. It was once referred to as the Great Garbage Can of San Francisco, where every other federal prison dumped their worst apples. So it's no surprise, given its brutal conditions, that the island is home to several spirits and hauntings from souls that just can't move on. Most ghost investigators report that the hottest spot for paranormal activity in the building is cell 14D, a cell that was also nicknamed the Hole. Gotta wonder if they borrowed that from Eastern State. It was where the most unruly prisoners would be kept when they were being difficult. It's been said that even walking by 14D, you'll immediately feel something's wrong, as if a dark presence or energy is in the room with you. An inmate once spent his last days in 14D, screaming that he was being hunted by an otherworldly creature. Visitors report hearing crying and moaning while walking through cell blocks A, B, and C, where most of the population would have been kept. It's said that a ghost named the Butcher walks through these halls after an inmate named Butcher Malkowitz, a mob hitman, was whacked by another inmate. Now, if this isn't enough haunting for you, some dark tourists also report hearing discordant, disembodied banjo strumming, thought to be a holdover from the spirit of Al Capone, who used to play his banjo in the prison band. Although the prison was decommissioned in 1963, it reopened shortly after, now as a museum and a haunted tour popular with Bay Area locals and visitors curious about learning about one of America's darkest prisons and perhaps its most haunted. Visit if you dare, but just make sure you're able to leave.
Number 5. The Banff Springs Hotel. First opening in 1888, nestled in Canada's Rocky Mountains, the Banff Springs Hotel has played host to a variety of guests over the years, not all of them mortal beings. The Banff Springs Hotel is known for its variety of ghosts, who allegedly haunt its halls, the most benign of which is Sam the Bellman. Sam McCauley was an old man from Scotland who came to Canada and became the head bellman at the Banff Springs. Sam loved his job and often joked that he would work at the hotel forever, even refusing to retire until his death in 1975. In the years since, several guests have reported a bellman in an antiquated uniform, matching Sam's description, wandering the halls, asking about their stay, and even helping guests who are locked out of their rooms. Less wholesome is the famous Phantom Bride, who according to legend was married at the hotel in the early 30s. Apparently, before the wedding reception, the bride was making her way up the large marble staircase leading to the Cascade Ballroom to join her husband, who was waiting at the top. She tripped on her own dress and fell down the stairs, making her husband a widower in the process. There have been tales of the bride haunting the hotel ever since, with strange crying noises being heard in the empty bridal suite, and reports of a phantom bride dancing alone in the ballroom or making her way up the fatal staircase. The most disturbing of the hauntings is the events that took place in room 873. According to legend, a man was staying with his wife and daughter in the room when he went mad and ended the lives of all involved. In the years since, the ghosts of the child and her mother have apparently remained in the room, with guests being awoken by violent screams and finding bloody handprints on the mirror that the maids could not manage to wash off. The reports got so numerous and disturbing that the hotel management sealed off the room, making it unavailable for guests. However, despite the numerous supernatural specters you may encounter, the hotel's beautiful architecture and services, as well as the scenic mountain views and the amazing skiing available in Banff, will make you never want to leave. Number 4. The Omni Mount Washington Hotel. Located in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, the Mount Washington Hotel was built in 1902 by Joseph Stickney. Sadly, soon after the hotel was built, Joseph passed away, being survived by his wife, Carolyn. Carolyn eventually remarried to a French prince, but the newly minted princess continued to spend her summers at the luxurious hotel, always staying in her personal suite, room 314. In the years since Princess Carolyn's death, there have been several reported instances from guests and staff alike about seeing the princess sitting at the foot of the bed. The following story from one of the former employees is particularly chilling. In 1997, I was working as a housekeeper and had to clean room number 314, the princess's room. I went to service the room that newlyweds were staying in, and I knocked on the door and there was no answer. I opened the door, went in, and there was a little girl sleeping on the bed. Immediately, I went to the hallway to see my inspector and told her I couldn't clean the room because a little girl was sleeping. She said that was odd because the guests were newlyweds and nobody else was registered. She asked me to leave a note that I was coming back in an hour to service the room. I went back in the room to leave the note by the table. I walked in the room quietly to not wake the little girl up. When I looked at the bed, instead of a little girl, there was a woman staring right at me with the most scary smile on her face. She had black hair and was wearing a white dress. I got chills down my spine and I just stood there, frozen. She sat on the bed and kept kept staring at me. I ran out of the room and told my friend, who was also a housekeeper. We both went back in the room and there was no one there. I still have a hard time remembering that incident, and I get chills every time I speak about it. I have many friends that have worked there, and I heard a lot of scary things that happened. Oh, the day before this happened, my friend and I took pictures of ourselves on the princess's bed. Everybody tells me that I made her upset by doing that. There have also been tales of other areas of the hotel playing host to paranormal activity, such as this story of the ballroom. As I walked into the ballroom late one evening on a night where there was no performers, I heard the faint sounds of an orchestra playing. I thought a rehearsal was going on, and I went to see who it was. There was no one there. No one. As I walked away from the side of the stage, the lights suddenly went out, and the music got louder. It was surreal and very, very scary. I ran to the light switch and saw that it had been turned off. I turned it back on, and the lights went on for a second, and then the switch turned down on its own. The entire time, the music kept playing. I ran out and found security and told them what happened. They went in to investigate and found nothing. No music and no problem with the lights. Despite the various ghosts, the Mount Washington Resort provides guests with stunning views of the mountains and the famously beautiful foliage of the White Mountain National Forest. This combined with the amazing ski opportunities, the on-site golf course, and the fact that it has played host to several famous guests, including 3 US presidents and Thomas Edison, will make your trip a memorable vacation that you'll never want to leave.
Number 3. India. Located in West Bengal, there's a train station that, from the looks alone of it, looks like you need a tetanus shot and a priest with you at all times. There have been many ghostly sightings at this outdoor railway, the Guncoder train station. Yeah, you don't want any part of this smoke because apparently it's a mix of local lore, criminal activity, and media attention. Passengers on this dusty track can be sure to see the diluted figures of ghostly women that have been seen in and around the tracks at night. For many years now, draped in a bright white sari, walking down the dusty tracks wandering the afterlife, slowly trudging along. There is legend that the women that have been seen here were victims of an accident on the tracks and that they were mournfully bound by the area of this previous accidental event. And of course, at the exact same time, as a local group of men in West Bengal just recently got busted after this nearly half-century old myth of a haunted railway station was uncovered as an operation to attract tourists. Potentially a big scam. Apparently camping behind the station at night, under police protection, the locals who created this myth, I guess, try and boost ghost tourism, and then apparently loot some of the tourists' belongings after scaring them away. Like, that's not a bad gig, you know? Of course, criminal and technically a train holdup. This just sounds like a good Scooby-Doo episode, doesn't it? The local ghost turns out to be just wise guys up to no good. Hey, let's see who the real ghost is. Huh? Number 2. Ireland. Again, at first, I thought the oldest train stations would be like in America somewhere, in the south or something. Some like Wild West type ghost locomotives just chugging along. Just carrying like pounds of gold or something. Nope. Europe again. Heading over to where they breed some of the roughest and the toughest, they make everything metal from locomotives to the Titanic herself. We arrive in Ireland. Connolly Station, busiest railway station in all of Ireland. Downtown city stuff, you know? And it's old. Opened its doors in like 1844. It was known back then simply as Dublin Station. It was actually blown up during World War II and laid rock and rubble until about 2016 when it was taken on as a challenge to rebuild what was then the iconic and original structured look of the pre-World War Central Station. Oh yeah, and of course lots of ghostly figures can be seen on the grounds of old Connolly Station there. Imagine just sipping your morning coffee on your way to work, standing next to a soldier on a horse with a sword. Like, horrifying. Apparently these are soldiers in military dress just wandering about the station. I've never been to a haunted railway myself, but apparently the gray military shadows are like more common than you think. They can be seen from on the tracks to even outside on security cameras. Apparently this place is like totally normal with this being like really haunted. I told my Irish buddy about Connolly Station last week. He's like, oh yeah, Connolly Station. Oh yeah, I know it like the back of my hand. Yeah, haunted. Yeah. Terrifying place. And number 1, Singapore. And now our last stop on our commute and our number 1 spot, Bishan Station. It's known as being one of the most haunted stations on this planet due to the influx of sightings and claims commuters have made surrounding this place. We start with some history. Built on the site of a former cemetery. Check. Yeah, seen some things, you know? I mean, isn't this how it always starts, building over cemeteries and graves? During its construction in 1987, due to the station's location in and or around the cemetery, workers from the beginning have had problems with the foundation, to floods, to even electrical fires. Haunted since they started, it seems, huh? Located on the Peck San Theng Cemetery, the station's tales include everything from kneeling apparitions, glowing orbs, and of course the countless headless spirits boarding the trains. That's one way to wake you up in the morning, you know? Who needs a coffee when there's a headless apparition walking around at 7 a.m.? Apparently the last car of the train is infamous and riddled with these so-called headless commuters. According to Singapore paranormal investigators, calls and letters from night passengers claiming to witness headless ghosts at the station is an unusually high number. The station is no stranger to accidents as well, adding to the lore. In 2004, a 31-year-old passed away after accidentally falling on the tracks. The same year, an elderly man was the victim of a similar accident falling onto the tracks. The operators added that the trains failed to properly operate due to the technical faults of previous floods. Hey, this station just got bad news bears written all over it, doesn't it? What do you think?
Number 5. The Castle of Good Hope. Coming up first on our list of haunted hotspots is going to be the Castle of Good Hope in Cape Town, South Africa. It was first built in the 17th century by the Dutch East India Company, so you just know there's bad vibes there to begin with. It's the oldest colonial building in South Africa, and if you believe the local legends, it's allegedly one of the most paranormal spots in the country. The first reported paranormal sighting from the castle came from 1915, when a tall, pale, mysterious man dressed in black, he sounds familiar, whose attire didn't match the era at all, country or anything, appeared seemingly out of nowhere, walking alongside one of the castle's ramparts before vanishing as soon as he appeared. Now that's pretty weird, definitely, not quite enough to label a place haunted, but it was a one-off incident, right? Well, in 1947, this same strange man kept appearing, making regular visits for weeks on end. He'd be jumping off the castle's walls, seemingly plummeting to his doom, only to reappear again to do it all again. I gotta be honest, he sounds kinda sick, all things considered. Sounds like he just wants to bungee jump and vibe out as a ghost. Another popular story from the castle is that of former governor, one Peter Giesbert van Noot. Whew, you try saying that 5 times fast. He passed in the castle on the 23rd of April, 1728, the same day he had sentenced 7 army deserters to the death sentence. The legend has it that one of these soldiers hexed him and demanded he face him and watch the execution. Van Noot was apparently a bit squeamish and refused the invitation, and later that day was found dead at his desk, slumped over. And some believe his ghost still wanders the castle's halls. And there were more ghosts I couldn't even fit into this one video because there's so many hauntings from this place. I recommend you read up about it afterwards. And if you want way more videos about haunted spots, ghosts, goblins, aliens, cryptids, conspiracies, true stories, fake stories, we got all of that and then some. So click through on Top 5 Scary, find something to watch, something to fall asleep to, I don't judge. Stay subscribed, stay scared, but stay watching this video. We worked hard on it. Alright, moving on through. Number 4, the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone. Maybe this one's a bit of an obvious pick, but our next entry is going to be the infamous Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, the real-life post-apocalyptic wasteland of Pripyat. Have you ever heard the word Kenopsia? Maybe not. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. I only learned this word today. But it refers to a feeling of seeing an atmosphere that you know is supposed to be populated, but isn't. And I feel like that word definitely applies to Chernobyl, or like liminal is a very good feeling too. It is kind of a liminal space, because you see all of these buildings and you can imagine a life happening there, but it's frozen in time. The Chernobyl blast would be enough to cover a whole video and then some. I heard there was a very good HBO series about it. And trying to cover it in under 2 minutes would be foolhardy, so here's the super quick Coles Note versions, is that a late night safety test simulating a station blackout power failure ended up starting a huge blast, which eventually threw radioactive material that blew all over Pripyat and the surrounding areas, causing everyone to have to pick up everything and evacuate, never to return. 50,000 people used to live here, and now it's a ghost town. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I only know that line from COD 4. All gillied up, best level in the series. That one's just for my gamers out there. Now you can actually visit Chernobyl, although they don't really recommend you do. You know, it's not a fun hotspot for tourism or anything. People who delve into the zone for recreation or to find things are called stalkers, named after the Tarkovsky movie of the same name revolving around visits to a strange zone, and not the video game Stalker where bandits raid the apocalyptic zone, although you would be forgiven for thinking that. Visiting the zone is no easy task. For one, it's recommended that you absolutely go with a guide or someone who knows the area very well, and then come all the requirements. You mustn't touch anything whatsoever. No vegetation. There are wild dogs that live in Chernobyl, and they're very cute, but you can't touch them at all because there could be traces of radiation in their fur. You have to wear an outfit that covers as much as possible. Big boots, don't show up in your Sunners and flip-flops. They recommend wearing a mask too to avoid inhaling any dust or any of the radioactive particles that could still be floating around in the air. Real life radiation, not half as fun as the comic books. You are very unlikely to come out of here with any web slinging superpowers. More likely just gonna have a bad cough and your family's gonna get real sad. You're asked not to enter any buildings because some are so degraded that they could collapse literally at any minute with the wrong pressure applied somewhere, and then you're just another tragedy. Now, I've never been, but from pictures, Chernobyl genuinely seems unreal, like it's not part of the world, It seems like it's something out of a movie or a video game, but it's this harrowing, soul-crushing reflection of our reality, a stark warning on the dangers of nuclear power, and a grim reminder that your life as you know it can be upended forever in but a moment. Number 3, the Driscoll Hotel. The Driscoll Hotel is another shining spot in the state, said to be a hotbed of paranormal activity. Lone Star State, Lone Scare State, more like. With how many ghosts are said to live in this place, it's hard to imagine that you'd even be able to get a free room. One of the more notable ones is the owner, the cowboy Jesse Driscoll himself, who built the place originally. Shortly after the hotel's construction, it's said that Jesse came under very hard times. So, desperate for money, Jesse gambled away the deed to the hotel in a game of cards, and was forever swallowed by this guilt, losing his cherished prize. It's said his spirit still resides in this hotel, in the room looking out at 6th Street and Brazos. A consultant once reported looking out of the window in this room and seeing a man dressed in old western attire, puffing a cigar, asking, "Hey fella, what are you doing in my room?" When he flicked the lights on and off to make sure he wasn't seeing what he thought he'd seen, the varmint disappeared, leaving behind only a trail of smoke. Another notable ghost guests like to talk about is the Bride, the ghost of a distraught woman who ended her life in the early 1990s after her wedding was called off, as she blew through all her money in a desperate coping attempt. I get it. Guests say that they see her ghost towing bags up and down the halls of the hotel, still running mad. Now I'll leave you with one last good spooky story out of the Driscoll. There was actually so many for this one. Definitely read up on it at home or visit if you're nearby. There seems like there's a lot going on. There's a painting on the 5th floor. It's a painting of a little girl holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a letter in the other. Paranormal enthusiasts claim that this painting is the daughter of a US senator who passed away in a freak accident at the hotel, and her spirit lingers on in the canvas. Guests claim that they can feel something tugging at their coats or legs when they walk on by. Oof, it's a little too interactive for me for an art experience. Number 2, the Oakwood Cemetery. I gotta say, a cemetery is a pretty classical location for something haunted to be happening. I think we all sort of suspect most cemeteries are haunted as is. I mean, a couple thousand dead bodies all buried underneath the same plot makes my hair stand on end. I said I was gonna try not to do a southern drawl, but I swear it's coming on naturally. I'm sorry. Oakwood Cemetery in particular is well known as a haunted spot to those who believe. It was established sometime in the 1850s, though it's thought that earlier settlers were laid to rest there too. With 23,000 souls resting there, it's no surprise that there is a litany of spooky stories amongst the tombstones. Take a listen to some of the more notable ones I dug up for you. One in particular that gets retold is that of Eula Phillips, a young woman who was struck fatally with an axe on Christmas Eve. Not that there's ever a good day for that, but that's a pretty bad one. Her husband was found guilty, only to be exonerated later when it turned out that there was a series of victims all around the same area matching her profile. 8 others who all fell victim to this is unbelievable that any newspaper ever printed this name, the Servant Girl Annihilator. I cannot believe they named him that. I've actually featured him in a video before. I can't quite remember the title of it, but click through on every single top 5 scary video until you find it. There are some theorists who suspect the Servant Girl Annihilator and the infamous Jack the Ripper are one and the same, and that guy just could not get enough traveling from country to country. Some local residents claim that Eula's ghost roams the cemetery, lost, afraid, and panicked, unable to come to terms with the vile means of her death. Another very notable ghost is that of Susanna Dickinson. When Lopez de Santa Anna attacked the Alamo, Susanna and her kin were brought into the garrison. The dust cleared and the battle was over, and Susanna met with Santa Anna, where he offered to take her and her children back to Mexico. But she declined, knowing it might even cost her her life. Surprised, Santa Anna spared her, and her account of the Alamo was crucial to understanding and remembering what happened there. Susanna was buried at a plot in Oakwood, and visitors say she constantly appears to strangers, telling her stories all these years on, still remembering the Alamo. Number 1. Yorktown Memorial Hospital. About 80 miles southeast of San Antonio is Yorktown, a small community with a population that barely exceeds a couple thousand. Probably a good reason for that, because if the legends are to be believed, the hauntings at the Yorktown Memorial Hospital might be keeping people away. The hospital was built in 1951, where it operated for a bit, and was eventually took over by the Felician Sisters of the Roman Catholic Church, who kept the place running until late 1986 when it was abandoned. Where it still sits today, almost as if nothing's happened. It looks like everybody just packed up and left. It's said that over 2,000 people call Yorktown their final resting spot, with 500 of those all occurring during the small tenure of the nuns running the hospital. These days, of course, the hospital's sickly lime green walls don't really see a lot of patients. Mostly just ghost hunters and seekers of the paranormal looking for something lurking left behind. And if the stories are true, this place is filled with restless ghosts. Explorers report everything from disembodied voices to sounds of wheelchairs creaking, mysterious flashes of lights, orbs, mists, cold chills, you know, the usual who's who greatest hits of haunted spots. Now, you don't even need to be told this place is haunted to worry about it. I mean, just look at it. The place looks like it's straight out of Silent Hill, down to the rusted pipes and leaky hallways, but don't fret, no, there are ghosts. One in particular is that of a late surgeon, one Leon Norwirski. He was infamous around the hospital for his sloppy handiwork, and was said to have lost a number of patients in his time, and his spirit as such has been cursed to wander the facilities endlessly. Keeps writing terrifying messages on the wall, but no one can read them because he's a doctor. That's not my best work. I'm really sorry. Some of these should have stayed on the writing board. Another infamous ghost is that of Sally, a young girl who's said to still live in the hospital's halls, heard happily playing, jovially dancing around, and even asking explorers to read her favorite story when she encounters them. I hope someone takes her up on that. Not me though, nothing personal. I just have like a policy about not reading stories to ghosts. Number 5. Eastern State Penitentiary. Starting off the list is Eastern State Penitentiary. It was a prison built in Philadelphia that wanted to stand out from the rest of the American penal system, trying out a new method of punishment called the Pennsylvania system. Well, do tell, what is the Pennsylvania system? It's not pleasant and has absolutely nothing to do with cheesesteaks. The Pennsylvania system refers to imposing the prisoners to solitary confinement all of the time, 24/7. The prisoners lived alone, ate alone, exercised alone, and were only ever allowed to interact with prison guards. When they were being transported or moved around the prison, the guards would make them don black hoods. Guess it's not nearly as sunny in Philadelphia as Frank Reynolds would have you believe. Now, this might not surprise you, but this was not a terribly popular system with inmates. The miserable conditions made the inmates' lives horrendous, but the prison didn't care too much. The system only ended up collapsing in 1913 due to overcrowding in the prison. But Eastern State didn't let this stop them from acting sadistically, and really, if anything, just inspired them to get a little more creative. Prisoners would have their tongues chained to their wrists. Unruly, troublesome prisoners would be chained to chairs for days on end. They would douse prisoners in freezing cold water, and perhaps worst of all, would trap prisoners into a pit they affectionately nicknamed the Hole, where they'd be kept in the darkness for weeks on end. I'm really not sure if that's any better than the original system. In 1970, after decades of terrorizing its inmates, Eastern State let the last of its inmates free and closed the gates permanently, only to crack cracked them back open a little bit as a tourist location, reopening its walls as a haunted attraction. Due to its horrific history and ominous atmosphere, the prison was rebranded as a haunt, with legends saying that you'll hear all kinds of disembodied laughter, screaming and crying, ghostly figures, shadows moving across the wall, and unexplained footsteps. And if you're looking for more scary stories about prisons or really about anything, then you're at exactly the right place. Stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary for more new scary videos every day. Number 4. Ohio State Reformatory. Ohio State is the picture of a perfect prison. I mean, literally, it was the set for the Shawshank Redemption, so it's kind of a big deal in the prison world. The prison first opened its gates in 1890 and was initially an intermediate penitentiary, a facility for first-time offenders who were deemed too violent to be in other prisons. The inmates were taught basic trades for release and reintegration. However, the prison population started to swell too much by the 20th century, and the reformatory was forced to accept inmates convicted of serious crimes. While day-to-day operations weren't too terribly out of the norm for any other prison, one event in the 1930s may have contributed greatly to the paranormal rumors surrounding it. In the late 1930s, a riot broke out in the East Cell Block, and as punishment, the guards rounded up 120 rioters to share 12 solitary confinement cells together for a week without any food or water. Obviously, this led to multiple prisoners passing away, and even more being broken down to the point of madness. Just outside the prison stands 215 numbered graves, a monument to all the horror that the prison had experienced over the years. Since then, the prison itself has reformed, rehabilitating itself much like Eastern State as a haunted house. Visitors and tour guides who walk through Ohio State report feeling inexplicable chills while walking through the prison's walls. Witnesses say they hear cell doors slam and see dark figures. Those brave enough are welcome to take the prison's tour and attempt to track down spirits of their own, or if you're feeling particularly festive for the Halloween season, you can try the Haunted Prison Experience, a guided tour replete with animatronics and actors for that haunted house feel. Number 3. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia. Now, some of the wisest men I've ever met have said that it's always sunny in Philadelphia. But if you were one of the doomed souls interred into Eastern State Penitentiary, it was anything but. Eastern State wanted to run things a little differently than the standard American prison system, dubbing their system of punishment the Pennsylvania system, or whack and use John's Philly style, depending on who was asking at the time. The Pennsylvania system refers to imposing the prisoners to solitary confinement all the time. Prisoners lived alone, exercised alone, ate alone, and were only ever accompanied by guards. When being escorted anywhere, the guards would put a black hood over inmates. Unsurprisingly, this was not a terribly popular system. It eventually collapsed inward on itself due to overcrowding, and the program was abandoned in 1913, just 5 years after the prison was constructed. Although this didn't really do much to improve conditions for the inmates there, and really just led the prison to come up with new terrible creative methods of inhumane treatment, such as chaining prisoners' tongues to their wrists, or strapping prisoners to chairs for days on end, dousing prisoners in freezing cold water, and putting the worst prisoners into a pit affectionately dubbed the Hole, where they'd be kept in the dark for weeks at a time. In 1970, after decades of terror, Eastern State closed its gates only to creep them back open as a tourist destination for dark tourists looking to go ghost hunting. A place like this is bound to be home to all sorts of rumors and spirits, right? Well, according to local legends, if you spend a night in Eastern State on one of their Halloween tours, you'll hear all kinds of disembodied laughter, screaming and crying, ghostly figures moving across the walls, and unexplained footsteps. Enjoy the sights. Just make sure the gate doesn't lock behind you. And while we're still on this one, does anybody else think that this could stand to be the best premise for an episode of Always Sunny, like, ever? The gang goes to jail, the gang gets haunted. If anybody knows Danny DeVito's agent, please DM us. Number 2, the Hellfire Club. Don't get too excited. The party won't be meeting Eddie Munson for a D&D session anytime soon at this Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club in Dublin, otherwise known as Montpelier Hill, was once home to a hunting lodge in the 17th century, owned by one Richard Parsons, a man obsessed with black magic and the occult. It's said that the Hellfire Club was a club for Satanists, as the leader was referred to as the King of Hell and would dress like the devil himself during meetings. Every meeting of the Hellfire Club, they left one seat open at the table, just in case Lucifer wanted to drop by. Stories go on to say that members of the Hellfire Club participated in all manner of dark and sinister ritual, sacrificing cats, goats, and if the legends are to be believed, even servants of the Hellfire Club themselves were offered. Legend has it that one fateful day, a strange man appeared in the middle of the night and asked if he could join in at the card game that they were playing for the night. As there was always an open seat, they decided to offer it to him. During the game, a player dropped his cards, and when he went underneath the table to retrieve his hand, they saw that the strange man they had invited had hooves in place of feet, and upon rising from the table, the stranger had vanished into a burst of flame. The building was scorched and set ablaze in 1750, with many differing accounts as to what caused the flame. Some say it was the club itself that set the building on fire to give a more intimidating appearance and keep out outsiders. Some say the devil himself did it, and some say it was a duel that ended badly. Whatever the cause, the Hellfire Club relocated their activities sometime in 1760, and the original building is left empty, where it still stands today. You can visit it today, and it's a fairly popular tourist destination for urban explorers and paranormal investigators who want to see if maybe there's any residual black magic in the soil and walls there. Number 1. Pavaglia. This list really has me all kinds of freaked out, reading about all these wretched places. I think we need to focus on a nice island getaway. Why not the island of Pavaglia? The forbidden island off the coast of Venice. I knew it was going to be haunted. I wrote this list. Pavaglia is an infamous island in Italian history, once serving as a quarantine zone and final resting place for the unfortunate victims of the Black Plague. As the plague ravaged Europe and paranoia set in across the lands, it was said that anyone who showed so much as the slightest symptoms were shipped off to Pavaglia to live out the rest of their days. Oftentimes, these people would be sent away without even truly being sick, dooming them to a horrific fate. It's said that over 50% of the island's soil is made of burned human ash. That is terrifying. The ground itself is haunted. In the early 19th century, the island was converted from a quarantine zone to a just as terrifying mental asylum, switching gears a little bit because apparently being host to one setting for a horror movie wasn't quite enough. The asylum did nothing to improve Pavaglia's haunted reputation. Instead of being home to the sick now, it was the home to droves of mentally disturbed patients who were made into unsuspecting victims by a doctor's experiments. Doctors of the asylum would impose their patients into lobotomies with no concern for sanitation or the victim's safety. The legend has it that the lead doctor at the asylum, who ran these twisted experiments, was so haunted by the spirits of his former patients that it drove him to such madness he cast himself over the tower of the island where his screams can still be heard. It's been said the island is home to countless tortured abandoned souls, still screaming. Now, if for some reason I told you all of that and you're thinking, I really want to visit, first of all, why? And second of all, you're gonna need to be pretty crafty, as the island is completely forbidden. You'll be pressed to the fullest extent of the law if you're caught trespassing into Pavaglia. Not even remotely worth the risk, if you ask me. At best, you get arrested. At worst, I got no idea.
Number 5. Canada. Our first stop, Waterfront Station, Vancouver, BC, home to the Canucks and apparently a bunch of train station ghouls. On my birthday, 1914, this haunted megalith opens. This place is haunted, okay? It's riddled by a couple famous ghosts and ghouls to locals. Apparently the ghosts of 1920s flapper girls can be seen the most on both security cameras as well as heard throughout the halls. 1920s music throughout the halls. Like, how isn't this a Wan Universe movie already? Of course, if you missed them, you can be sure to see the 3 old ladies quietly sitting on the infamous ghost bench, waiting in eternity for their train. The sitting bench ladies. Yeah. That's horrifying. And of course, if you exit the building to escape all the apparitions to the railway tracks north of the building, you might be sure to see the ghost of Hub Clark, a railway worker killed on site slipping on the tracks. The famous headless track worker is apparently he. His lantern still glowing in hand, commuters say late at night. The Headless Brakeman is the official title of that spirit by locals. Another security guard got a taste of the music in the northwest corner of the building. He entered an empty room and encountered a ghost of an old woman. She was glowing phosphorus white apparently and had a mournful look on her face. And then she reached out to grab him. Yeah. Apparently it's not the only security guard to be lunged at. Can you imagine? 6 hours into your workday and a ghost ghoul lady just reaching out to get you? Yeah. No thanks. As always, dudes, if you dig what we do here on Top 5 Scary, make sure to leave us a thumbs up down below. Or comment which haunted commute you take every morning. Apparently there's a haunted Bay Street entrance that's haunted right around the corner from me. Yeah, I won't be checking it out anytime soon, of course, but very interesting. Number 4, England. We now arrive home at some of the oldest train stations on this planet. Actually, the oldest. Leave it up to the Scousers to have the oldest working operable train stations as their Guinness World Record. Liverpool's railway stations have been kicking for a long time now. Lime Street Station, Liverpool Street Station, James Street Railway. These are some of the most haunted stations in all of Europe. Lime Street Station, Liverpool, has seen its fair share of spooky stories over the years. Opening back in 1833, this place is haunted so much it's practically joked about now. In 2012, a farce, A Nightmare on Lime Street, was performed at the Royal Court Theatre, starring David Guest as Frankenstein's monster, being recreated in the bowels of Lime Street Railway Station. It's like a joke at this point. James Street Station dates back to the 1880s and has been part of Liverpool's transport system ever since then. Also a staple part of this station appears to be the ghostly soldiers who have been riding the train from Birkenhead Central to James Street every day. He's been known to vanish mid-ride and dress as a colonel with a twirly mustache. Back in the 1990s, many people had written in and told the local paranormal writer Tom Slemon that passengers were seeing this ghost on a Liverpool train on the regular. Can you imagine? Ghost just leans over and asks you what time it is, just straddling a horse the whole time. Excuse me, mate, you got the time? Right, thanks. Number 3. Kaimuki House. This Halloween, if you're trick-or-treating, listen to old Uncle Kyle and do not go near this house. Located in the Kaimuki neighborhood of Honolulu, Hawaii, this place has a horrifying reputation. Apparently, murder and a most foul nature has occurred in the house many times. Murder case after disappearance, the local stories became fiction. It's now known by locals as the most haunted place on the island. And here's why. The house itself looks like a normal, surf-friendly home. Yeah, not really. Enter stage right, the Kasha. The Kasha is a creature said to reside in the actual house. It's a man-eating ghost from Japanese folklore. Not just story, the events from the Kaimuki house have been documented. Well documented. Interpretations of the monster includes a ghoul who lives and feeds on the dead, a cat-like demon from the sky who steals away bodies. However, all 3 versions have one thing in common. Its hunger for corpses. Ooh. In 1942, police officers were called to the house by a woman who apparently kept repeating, "She's trying to get my children." Upon entering the house, the officers could do nothing but apparently watch in horror as the members of the family were all levitating and ragdolled and hurled across the room by an unknown force. The police were baffled and decided to just load everybody up in the car and leave the premises. The original Kaimuki house was torn down during the summer of 2016 and has since yet been under investigation and new construction. Okay. So no vacation in Hawaii this summer. Noted. Number 2. Ancient Ram Inn. Of course we needed an ancient old haunted inn, didn't we? Isn't this the start of like every great horror movie? The lights flicker in an old haunted inn in the middle of nowhere. The bell dings but no one answers. Should have been a writer. Well, luckily this is also a functioning pub, and it's located in Watton-under-Edge, a market town within the district of Gloucestershire, England. Look at this place. It's like bending and molding to the earth, like a fence that's grown around a tree. This thing is old. The inn has been owned and operated by many people, going back as far as 1,000 years, since like 1145. Hope they clean their beer taps. This inn was said to have been owned by the St. Mary's Church when first built. And of course, with that, it's haunted. The Ancient Ram Inn has been investigated by years of paranormal researchers. Television shows like Ghost Adventures and Most Haunted. The inn was investigated by UK paranormal study group, the Ghost Club, which is apparently the oldest paranormal research organization in the world. It's haunted. But what makes something haunted? Is it the age or the sinister events that happened in and around the premises? This land sits on the intersection of 2 lines that people think contain high spiritual energy. Using a map, of course, these lines trace directly to England's most sacred site, Stonehenge. Legend has it that the energy from Stonehenge feeds the property's paranormal power. Not to mention, the backyard is home to a 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground. Witches being burned at the stake on the property. Hey, if you see a pagan ghoul pouring himself a Guinness in the middle of the night, just say cheers and keep walking. Number 1. Bran Castle. It's October, so we're feeling extra spooky around here at Top 5 Scary. We're familiar with the classics, right? If we're not, go and binge some horror movie marathons, people. The castle of all castles. Dracula. Well, kinda. What Dracula was based off of. Where he lived, at least. Also, the national monument of Romania itself. Fun fact. It doesn't get much more Halloween-y than this place, come on. Bran Castle is linked to the historical figure who inspired author Bram Stoker's creation of this half-bat, half-man. No, not Batman. Vlad III, Dracula, otherwise known as Vlad the Impaler. Don't panic, this was like a couple years back, like mid-1400s. We know this guy, and yes, you heard it right, the Impaler. I don't really need to get into much detail with this one. To impale. Google it. Some believe Bran Castle was one of the sites which Vlad reigned. Unfortunately, history says that he wasn't around here. In fact, it says that he was only imprisoned here for a little bit. Yeah, although there's no coffins inside. So what makes this place so scary? Apparently during Stoker's research to the region of Transylvania, he came across accounts of the atrocities committed by Vlad and used the Dracula name after studying him. And of course, this castle, built out of wood originally, somewhere around the 11th, 12th century, seems to be pretty fitting upon research of the old haunted castles territory. Unfortunately, this 1,000-year-old home isn't really a home anymore, just home to relics now, and the occasional cold breeze and fuzzy camera picture. Bran Castle acts as a museum now and a popular Halloween destination. Apparently they found a gold casket that houses the heart of Romania's Queen Marie in the walls. Yeah, that's pretty haunted castle material, no? Number 5. Chateau de Montségur. A petite and quaint fortress in southern France, sitting atop a 170-meter drive uphill. Its ruins now nothing but rock and rubble, but once a safe house for the Cathars. The Cathar vision of the universe was dualist, in that good and light confronts evil and darkness. Right? Pretty straightforward. Very Jedi of them. This belief led them to follow a very disciplined way of life. Before, of course, they were decimated from the Catholic Church, initiated by Pope Innocent III. Innocent, huh? The ruins nicknamed now Satan's Synagogue. Yeah, nice and light right off the top, huh, Kyle? Described as one of the last Cathar castles and has been listed as a monument historique by the French Ministry of Culture. Cathar, from Greek meaning pure. These people were devout. In 1233, the site became the seat and head of the Cathar Church. The fort roughly housed about 500 people during this time. In 1242, a military of about 10,000 troops fought against the castle that was held up by only 100 Cathars. So like very Jedi all of a sudden. The siege lasted 9 months. Until 2 years later, the castle finally surrendered. North of 200 Cathars were burned in a giant bonfire unless they renounced and changed their faith, some taking the Cathar vow just weeks before this. Those who renounced the Cathar faith were allowed to leave, but the castle itself destroyed. The field below, now famously known to have been where hundreds of men and women were burned alive. The apparent bonfire that happened sparked a curse from the Cathar peoples. Legends of these ruins say any person who strays off the marked footpaths of these ruins and loses their footing will drop off of every side of the citadel in the sky. Sounds more like a metaphor to me than a curse. Number 4. Kalaupapa. In 1866, during the reign of Kamehameha V, Hawaiian officials passed a law designating this island the official site for patients affected with leprosy. Kalaupapa, a small peninsula in the north shore of Molokai, has quite a bitter and spooky history. The king exiled those who contracted Hansen's disease here, noting it was the ideal spot secluded and surrounded by the highest cliffs in the world. The peninsula served as a natural outdoor prison, accessible only by one steep path by foot or boat to shore. About 1,200 families were exiled to quarantine here. At the time, the disease wasn't really understood, believing it to be very incurable. Whisked off and locked away amid paradise in total isolation. No amenities, no buildings, or even potable water. Known by historians who visit it as, quote, the pit of hell itself. And apparently the most cursed place on Earth. Yeah, I didn't know that. With its grim history of loneliness, despair, and death, it's not really surprising at all that Kalaupapa is said to be one of the most haunted places in all of Hawaii. This island was basically a death sentence for those on it. Shackles, cages, caves. Sounds about right to be haunted by the afterlife.
Number 3. Mausoleum of the first Qin Emperor, Qin Shi Huang. The tomb of former Emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, is notable for many reasons. Maybe it was because in 1974, when farmers from the Shaanxi province were digging a well, they discovered hundreds upon hundreds of terracotta soldiers, complete with horses, chariots, officers, infantry, a court, I think even some bears, oh my. They discovered one of the world's greatest archaeological wonders. 2,000 terracotta soldiers in Qin Shi Huang's tomb. The tomb was built like this basically to serve as history's most impressive flex. Qin Shi Huang wanted to make it good and clear that even in death, he held more might and more power than anyone could ever imagine. You know that saying, you can't take it with you? Well, he wanted to take it with him. He wanted his own army to serve him in the afterlife. The wild part about this is we don't even know how far it goes, since it still hasn't fully been uncovered even all these years later. Those thousands of terracotta soldiers might just be the first wave of guys. While he reigned, Qin Shi Huang wanted to make very sure that his tomb was a good approximation of his legacy. So thousands of laborers worked tirelessly for decades to create an emperor's tomb. They think that 700,000 laborers worked on this for 40 years. That's already unbelievable, but Qin Shi Huang only even lived to be 49, so good thing they got that done in time, eh? Qin Shi Huang himself is buried beneath an enormous pyramid mound that stands a good distance away from the rest of the tomb. Now here's where the haunted part starts to come in. According to historians, this central tomb contains treasures and wondrous objects he attained during his life, including a flowing river of pure mercury, which doesn't really sound like the greatest idea, but back then they thought that made you immortal. Soil testing the nearby areas does have elevated levels of mercury, so that might actually be true. No one is too eager to check though, since it sounds like Qin Shi Huang kitted this place out to keep any would-be Nathan Drakes or Lara Crofts from raiding this uncharted tomb. It's said that it's got ancient ballistas and all sorts of traps like mechanisms that'll fire arrows at potential grave robbers, and hey, that mercury vapor probably isn't doing you any favors, so don't try to breathe that in. In any case, the Chinese government has been in no rush to explore what's down there. It's best to let the sleeping dead lie, especially when the sleeping dead has thousands of personal bodyguards, and it's probably haunted, let's be real. Number 2, Snake Island. Our next entry, Isla de Quimada Grande, is formally dubbed as Snake Island, which really should tell you right off the bat that whatever I'm about to describe is not a friendly place. Traditionally, places are only named things like Snake Island if they're like, you know, filled to bursting with snakes, or if they're home to like a snake-themed supervillain or something. I'm pretty sure the guys who fought G.I. Joe lived on Snake Island. Anyway, Snake Island is called that because by conservative estimates, there's roughly a snake for every square meter of the island, meaning there's anywhere from 4,000 golden lancehead vipers or more living there. There's more snakes than there are people, and that's because most Brazilian locals know way better than to go to an island where one of the most venomous snakes on the planet live. Yeah, I left that part out. Well, I'm talking about it now. It's not just like garter snakes slithering about here. Isla de Quimada Grande is home to the golden lancehead, a beautiful creature in its own right that just happens to be one of the most lethal bites to humans. A bite from this snake can cause, let's list off some fun side effects: kidney damage, necrosis, brain hemorrhaging, venom poisoning, and oh, my favorite, internal intestinal damage. So just leave them alone. Even if for some bizarre reason I've told you all of that and you just love going to places you're not meant to and you're just dying for a chance to go visit venomous Snake Island, you are going to run into a bit of trouble because it's literally forbidden. The Brazilian government strictly monitors those who travel. Naval forces do visit annually to maintain the lighthouse, and there's a research station to study and analyze the local population, but all of these visits are accompanied by paramedics and trained doctors, just in case any of the locals decide to say hello the only way they know how. Am I the only one who thinks the golden lancehead is kind of cute, like in a little weird way? I don't want one as a pet, but I don't know, I think these danger noodles have very cute little eyes, but maybe that's just one of my red flags. And number 1, Poveglia. This list has not been pleasant. I guess I should have expected that, given the tone of all of these wretched, horrible, and haunted places. So let's close this list off and find somewhere nice and sunny to get away from all of life's woes. Maybe somewhere nice like, I don't know, Italy? Maybe somewhere off the coast of Venice, like the island of Poveglia? Now, Poveglia is an infamous island in Italian history. It once served as a quarantine zone and final resting place for victims of the Black Plague. You know that one. As the plague ravaged Europe and paranoia set in across the lands, it was said that anyone who showed so much as a symptom, you know, if you had a runny nose, they shipped you off to Poveglia to live out the rest of your days. Oftentimes, they would send people who weren't even really sick. You know, you just complain about a headache trying to get a day off work and you're on a longboat to the last island you're ever going to go to. It's said that over 50% of the island's soil is made of burned human ash. Let that set in for a second. The ground itself is haunted. In the early 19th century, the island converted from a quarantine zone to a mental asylum because I guess it thought that that wasn't scary enough. The asylum did not do much to improve Poveglia's reputation. Instead of being home to the sick, now it was home to droves of mentally unwell patients being made into victims by a doctor's sick experiments. Cruel doctors at the asylum would impose their patients into lobotomies with no concern for sanitation or their safety, with chisels, drills, and rarely if ever using anesthetic. An old ghost story has it that the main doctor at the asylum was haunted by the spirits of his former patients and the crimes he'd committed, and it drove him to such madness that he cast himself off the bell tower of the island, where they say his screams can still be heard. Now, if I told you all of that and you still want to visit, first of all, why? And second of all, you're going to need to be pretty crafty, as it's totally, completely forbidden. You will be pressed to the fullest extent of the law if you're caught trespassing, not even remotely worth the risk if you ask me. At best, you get arrested. At worst, haunted for the rest of your days.